and a dinner, and we are not in town. And, yeah. So I think we got to make that happen sometime. But thank you for the lovely introduction and for having both Naveen and Raji over with us today. It's fascinating to see a full house. Thank you for your support. We'll make this conversation worth it for everyone. I'm here to explore the the fascinating journey of Naveen and Raji. Are you able to hear me, or you want the volume up? It's okay. So I'm here to explore their fascinating journey in this what I personally believe very purposeful. Yes, sir. Well, we can't help it. We are all very down to earth people. So we are at the same level as you. So
most of that is still not the architect is done. It's a very beautiful modern building. We live with modern buildings.
So let me introduce the concept behind the Uncommon Leader series first. When this is the third season for us. We've been working with MMA for 3 years now, and this is the 18th edition of the Uncommon Leader. Thank you so much. So the Uncommon Leader brings what we believe is a teachable point of view, a learnable point of view from outside of the corporate or the core business arena. And every other month, we do this once in 2 months, so every other month virtually, we come back here with guests who have very unique backgrounds and very interesting journeys. So we've had a fisherman who turned out to be a surfing champion. We had a person who is an IAS officer who has resurrected Co-optex. Venkatesh, you would all know Venkatesh. We have had last month, in the month of May, last edition, we had Dr. P. Srinivasan, a medical doctor who went on to set up the Jeevan group of institutions. And in March, we had Sriram Iyer of Nalanda Way, who uses art to help children with coming from underprivileged backgrounds as a form of education, as a form of rehabilitating them. So every edition brings out a quality, a learnable, teachable quality in an uncommon leader. And all of it connects back to something very important for Vani and me, which is all these people are intrinsically very happy people. Look at Naveen and Raji. Look how they are radiating. Apart from the fact that Naveen and I are radiating for different reasons, okay. But apart from that, they are intrinsically happy people, and happiness is the space that Vani and I believe we want to spend the rest of our life working in. We believe our life's purpose is inspiring happiness. We've been through a very difficult decade, this past decade, 2007 to 2017, and continuing now into 2018. It's our 11th year of going through a bankruptcy. And we have seen long spells of worklessness and pennilessness in this time. But in all this time, we learned the value of being happy. And we found that talking to happy people, talking to people who are driven by a sense of purpose, talking to people and learning from them keeps the mind engaged. And so that's how we started curating interesting conversations around the city of Chennai. We do 4 of them, and the Uncommon Leader series is one of them. In this particular series, we draw inspirations from the life journeys of people who have had a very unusual phase in their life when they have made intelligent choices to come back and serve communities that they live and work in. And through that, we draw lessons in entrepreneurship. See, when we typically look at entrepreneurship, we're kind of convinced that an entrepreneur must have a vision. We all know that. An entrepreneur should know where the organization is going. That's vision. Or how to get there, which is mission. or what not to compromise on. What are the guiding principles that will remain uncompromised? Those are the values. And of course, the venture must be profitable. So these are common traits in entrepreneurs, but there are some unique traits, you can call them even uncommon, which is entrepreneurs are essentially people who see reality and mobilize the appropriate response. They go and fulfill unfulfilled needs. Noel Tichy calls this leadership. And he says entrepreneurs must live their lives leading it in a very, very purposeful manner. So the other word there is purpose. Purpose is always about why are we doing what we are doing? Or what would be lost if we stop doing what we are doing? So entrepreneurs are also people who bring leadership to the table, they bring purpose to the table, and interestingly, they don't just grow people around them as managers, as people who are high-performing managers, they also grow them as good human beings. And so, to me, empowered entrepreneurship, which is what this is talking about here, is all about vision, mission, values, and profits on one side, but it's also about leadership, purpose, and growing people. And that complete whole is what you will find in whatever Naveen and Raji are doing. With the Head Start Learning Center, they call themselves co-creators. They don't like to be kind of straight-jacketed in terms like chairperson and managing director and head of the institution and stuff like that. They prefer calling themselves co-creators. So who are my guests today? They are obviously a very empowered leaders in their own right. From their lives, we are going to pick up lessons in entrepreneurship. But what's their background? Both of them are engineers. They were in the typical, let me call this, I don't want to use the word rat race, but would it be wrong to call it a rat race? Yeah, it's been called many things. It's been called many things. So they were typically on that journey, which took them to the United States. So most Indian engineers do end up in the United States, and they had a very comfortable, cushy life over there. Left to themselves, they would have probably been there, but they wanted to come back to India to be with their parents in 2005. And when they came to India, they engaged with a school that had been set up by Naveen's mother, Sudha, who's here. And the school was called Head Start, am I right? Yeah. The school was called Head Start. And while Raji went to work with Ability Foundation, run and headed by Jayashree Ravindran, Naveen went to see how he could help around with Sudha's venture, the school. And there, he started asking very important fundamental questions. What is the purpose of education? Why do we send our kids to school? Is it to prepare them for life, or is it to prepare them for exams? And if you look at it, most of us have been through schools that have prepared us for exams. And we repeat that cycle without fail. We send our kids preparing them for exams. And Naveen decided to flip the paradigm, and he asked these questions. This led to the school evolving into a social incubation center. And that center is today called the Head Start Learning Center. They have seeded 5 brilliant, unbeatable ideas, which are game-changing ideas. We're going to talk about them today. And because of the courage that they've shown, because of the conviction that they've brought to the table, and because of the success that they've begun to see, they are called the Ashoka Changemaker School. They've been recognized as an Ashoka Changemaker School. And in the last 13 years, they have touched the lives of several hundreds of children. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the background to my guests today, Raji and Naveen. So please join me in welcoming them. Thank you. Was that a good summary? Yeah? Yeah?
Sounds better than it probably is.
Okay. You need to hold up the mic and you need to share the mic between the two of you. We will need the mic, although we can still be audible because they're recording this conversation and it needs to go on the live stream as well as be available on YouTube tomorrow. Okay? So the way we do this conversation, ladies and gentlemen, is for the next about 45 odd minutes, I'll be in conversation with the two of them. And then we will open up the floor for questions. And this is a small room with only one exit. So please don't leave till the program is over. If you stay back, and those of you who are new, you will receive free hugs from me. Okay? That's something that I promise everybody if you stay back till the very end.
You can make it a room with no exit also.
Okay, so can you increase the sound, please, for people at the rear? Yeah. Okay, so please do stay back. We will end sharp at 7:29. That's a promise because both Group Captain Vijay Kumar and I work with that sense of precision. So fantastic. Thank you, Raji and Naveen, for joining me. So my first question, both of you can take a shot at this. How does it feel, 13 years, doing some very unconventional work and in a very predictable space, education, academics? How does it feel? How would you describe your 13-year journey so far?
I think transformational yet humbling. Transformational because I don't think we even thought that this is where we will be 13 years ago. It has been a step-by-step journey. Yet humbling because it couldn't have been without every single person who has been with us, who has shown more passion, more commitment, more work than we could have ever imagined in this whole journey. So it's a combination of both, a sense of achievement, but yet very humbled because it has been only possible because of every single person who has been with us in this journey.
Thank you, thank you.
I would refer to different emotions at different stages. Initially, it was very exciting to get into the space of education, try and understand how education is facilitated in schools in India. And then there was a lot of apprehension and self-doubt whether this is even possible. What I was setting out to do was, did I even understand enough about the challenges that were present already? Today, however, I think that sky's the limit. I think anything is possible. Like Raji says, a lot of that strength comes from just working with society, working with extremely capable people, and surrounding ourselves with champions.
Fantastic. Great start there. So I'm picking up very important words here: transformational and humbling, exciting, apprehension at times, and then feeling boundarylessness and limitlessness, right? So those are the key words that we will explore through the conversation today, okay? How transformational it has been and what kind of apprehensions you had to deal with, and why do you say it's so exciting now to be looking at a horizon which is completely ready to be consumed, right? So let's go back to that time in, were you living in New York?
In New Jersey, sometime in New York and sometime in New Jersey.
So on the East Coast. So
yeah.
Let's go back to that time on the East Coast in the US when around, let's say, let's talk from that time around the turn of the millennium from 2000 to 2005. What was life like for the two of you? You were much younger than you are today. And how would you like to describe your life at that time, and what kind of future were you looking at that time for yourselves?
I'd say we were very carefree at the time. Literally, we were living from one weekend to the next, thinking of what to do over weekends and what places to explore, who to visit, just having a great time. Neither of us went with anywhere with an intention to stay back there. We were merely, I think we are explorers at heart. We just wanted to go and see a lot of places, understand different cultures. And it was an exciting time, but with no future as a no goal ahead of us as such. I think we were just living in the moment for the most part. What would you say?
I think it was every weekend we would hit the road and we won't know where we are heading to. I think we are still the same today as well. Every weekend we would hit the road and we won't know where we are heading to. And we used to have a very beautiful time. I think we just loved those 5 years, explored a lot, enjoyed a lot, met a lot of people, made a lot of friends, and experienced everything that the US could offer. All the things, every possible thing that the US could offer is something that we had fun.
And both of you were employed. You had full-time engagements with corporations.
Yes, I predominantly worked with startups only in the US and even in India. Yeah, they were full-time jobs.
They were full-time jobs.
Yeah.
Was something like what you were doing even remotely on the cards, where you were considering doing something on your own at that time?
Sorry, I didn't follow
Was
the question.
something like what you're doing right now even remotely on the cards, like
No.
entrepreneurship or
Not at all. I
seeding
think,
a new idea or something like that?
I think it was a lot simpler. We were considering coming back primarily to take care of our parents. We were very concerned with that feeling of a lot of families hearing about their families in distress and our not being available to our family in their time of need was an unacceptable position. So we said we should come back for that reason. But no, we didn't foresee any of what we're doing now at the time. At least I didn't.
So let's go now to, so there was a lot of exploring going on. You were enjoying your time in the US weekend to weekend, living weekend to weekend. While all of that was happening, there was no idea that this is what you would end up doing. But when the actual decision to come back to India to be with Sudha and Mahesh and with your parents, Raji, what were the options on the cards for the Naveen and Raji family? Did you have an employment on the cards? Did you think of setting up, since you had worked with startups, did you consider starting up a venture of your own? What were you looking at when you were packing your bags in New Jersey?
I think we were looking at setting up a coffee shop.
Wow!
We thought it will be a very unique, very different coffee shop. The music that will be there. We had imagined the music, the furniture, the food, and all of it. How will it cater to the youngsters? And it will serve everything that we like, not what other people will like, but and the music that we like. So we were thinking of starting a coffee shop in Bangalore.
Okay, in Bangalore.
In Bangalore.
So it was not even Chennai. It was not even Chennai.
In the time that I used to work in the US, in New York, I used to be part of a band actually. I used to play in a pub in New York. So the both of us used to romanticize about how we could run something like that ourselves in India. So, I mean, not a pub maybe, but more like a coffee shop. I'm very fond of music. I'm all the time listening to music. So I like the idea that people, there must be something nice about community spaces. So I think it was around community spaces, but the idea sort of came about that we should run a coffee shop. But I don't think that one ever got off the ground. I don't think we even thought about it one day after coming back to India.
That's interesting. So I think some of you can't see the front of the room, but when we do stand up in a little while, when we end the conversation, you will find that Naveen does look the part that can carry himself off as a musician, right? You definitely do.
We
look
have
like
some serious musicians.
Yeah, I know you have some serious virtuous
I should
musicians.
be careful.
Here in the
I was a
audience,
musician to people who were drunk, so it was fine.
But that's interesting. So you had these very very romantic ideas, if I may call. When Vani and I started our entrepreneurial career, or rather when we were attempting to start one, we had a dry cleaning service, a housekeeping service, and a restaurant as our ideas, and they never got off the ground. So I think it's perfectly all right to be a romantic, especially when you are starting off a business. But let's come back. So you come back to India, and where does and you join Ability Foundation. Naveen, did you consider employment with somebody? Did you attempt to get yourself a job, or did you join Sudha at school primarily to see how, as a dutiful son, you could help with a mother's venture? How did the engagement with the school begin for you?
I think I just came back and I offered to help in whatever way I can, and I realized that I knew nothing about what she did actually, except that I had myself had a school education. I didn't know much about how schools ran, and I was more keen to try and understand what was going on. So I just volunteered and started working at the school. I taught pretty much every subject in the well, we had only seventh standard was the highest. I think we had sixth or seventh. So I taught all the subjects at that level to the few children that were there. But yeah, that's all.
So that wasn't there an idea to have a very structured engagement with the school, or was it just let me check this out, let me see how this is going for me? Were you tentative about it?
No, I wasn't. I don't think I was tentative about it. I didn't know what I could add to the system unless I understood what was going on. And I think, be it the organization or the industry, I think learning is, there's a lot of time that goes into learning and before you can actually start to add any value to it. So I just sort of subscribe to the view that I'm going to learn a lot about.
And how long did you give yourself to engage in that learning curve? How long did you give yourself?
I don't think it's ended even now. I think there's no end. School is just is a hotbed for learning. I mean, be it the adult or the child in that space. So I think I can't stop that process at all. But I started to understand what was going on, what were the intentions of school education, and what were the processes that people followed, and how effective they were, what their understanding of how they were trying to bring social transformation through the work that they did. So because of mom being a serious senior school educator and author of books, I was pretty much welcomed into almost every school in this city. Oh, Sudha Payana, Vava, come learn whatever you like to learn here. And I walked into almost every school in this city and sat in on classrooms and tried to understand their perspectives, their challenges, pretty much everything. I was like a sponge absorbing everything, and I was trying to first understand what was going on. And I also started visiting various places to try and understand who else thinks this, which other part of the world do they do this.
That's how you went about it.
Yeah.
So you came back in 2005, and would it be right to imagine that the first couple of years were spent in this kind of a routine?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we were working from a house at the time I came.
The school itself was in a house.
Yeah, the whole school was in a house, and Appa and Amma and my grandmom, they used to live upstairs and the school was downstairs. And so first thing we did was we tried to ask the parent community if they had a little bigger space that we could rent from them. And that's the first thing we did. But I spent a lot of my time wastefully in looking for land for school and things not related to building a better society at all. I learned a lot about how this society works and why we have the challenges we have. But I think if I could roll back time, I would not do that. I think learning is not confined to spaces of any one kind. I think you can learn anywhere. You can facilitate learning anywhere.
I'm going to draw two very important takeaways here from what he just said. One is that if you want to work in a space, you must understand it thoroughly. And his sense that he needed to learn, he needed to explore and learn the space of education, the way it was being administered in the country. I think that is a clear takeaway for me. And this applies not only in the space of schools that we all know little about, but it also applies in any entrepreneurial idea that you may want to take forward. If you don't know the space, beware about getting into it. And the second takeaway is that it never stops. So the learning curve is not something that you draw a definitive deadline and say, I'm going to graduate in a couple of years. This is it. This is my research, and now I'm ready. I think you continuously keep advancing only to discover that the horizon has shifted and there is a lot more to cover. So those are two very important takeaways at this time for me. But I want to come back and ask you, when you were going through this process, what was your inner voice telling you? When did you actually start asking that all-important question? I mean, my favorite question: are we preparing children for life, or are we preparing children for exams? How did that question come about? Was it a eureka moment? Something happened in school, something happened in a conversation with an academician, with an educator? Was it a eureka moment, or was it something that organically kind of grew within you and ended up as a definition in your head?
Well, actually, my own upbringing at home and in my schooling years, I was given a lot of freedom in the way that I went about learning and how I understood myself first. I think quite a bit of education is about learning about the outside world. I think there wasn't enough focus on learning about oneself, and I think I had that advantage of learning about who I am and what I am capable of, having a sense of self-identity. That helped tremendously. But I don't think there was any eureka moment. I would refer it more to my experience as a child and as an adult, and how I see institutions operating towards one fixed end goal, which is not even serving a purpose. You keep hearing statistics like so few of our young adults are employable.
Excuse me, please. Thank you. Yeah.
Given that so few are employable and we seem to celebrate the existing paradigms, how come they don't contribute to a better society? If you're doing the right things, there would be evidence of it in society. We'd be championing so many good things. The fact that so few are employable, so many hurdles to development exist in our ecosystem, that I felt that there's no correlation between what we are trying to do in schools, in classrooms, and what we are expecting as outcomes for a better society. So does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, it does. In fact, I'm able to draw it into a very practical parallel for me. Around this time that Naveen was going through these questions in his head and kind of trying to understand where it led him, our son, Ashirwad, was in school, and he was a topper in science, and then he took commerce, and the whole school went aghast. Why would a topper in science want to take commerce? And then he topped commerce in high school and took economics. And again, the whole school went aghast, saying, why would you want to do economics? And so I think in a very, very realistic way, the focus on grades, the focus on being a topper and not exactly being a kind of a master in your space of what you love doing, has taken away a lot of talent in society, right? Or has caged a lot of talent. And I think you're dealing with that at a conceptual level, and I think we as parents deal with it at a practical level. And what the questions that you ask also translate at a very individual level, when people do tend to make choices that are different, and they're questioned as to why they're doing what they're doing. I want to go to Raji for a minute and then come back to you, Naveen. Raji, my question to you is, coming back from the US, that fun, carefree life, and then you come back here, you got a job with an NGO, with the Ability Foundation, and Naveen's into this exploratory phase of his life. How was it for you when you both used to have conversations? You could not possibly see where you're coming to. Today you are where you are, but you couldn't see it coming then. Did you at all feel nervous as a co-manager of the home? Did you feel that there is no predictable career path in front of either of you right now? How did you deal with it?
Actually, I think a lot of naivety helps. In the sense, when you stay in the moment and you enjoy the process, then and you don't worry about the future. Some may call it as being very naive, but I think that helped us quite a bit because we were just taking it from one day to another, not really thinking about something which was very big that was going to be in front of us. I think both of us knew that no matter what hard work was involved in anything, we knew that if this idea didn't work, then we will do something else. And we had complete confidence in our capabilities. So when you have your capability and hard work and perseverance in place, then you try something, and if it didn't work, then you go back to the drawing board and the next discussion starts. So I don't think at any point of time we have had self-doubt in whatever we did. If we thought of a coffee shop, it didn't feel like a very weird decision, and neither did it when I went to Ability Foundation or Naveen started looking at schools and education. So I think sometimes a little bit of naivety and staying in the present helps quite a bit in trying to remove all of the feelings that you will have about uncertainty and what is going to happen.
This is a very profound answer. This is profound not only from the point of view of life. Yes, you may clap. You may clap for this answer. Yes. Somebody was trying to clap noiselessly, and I thought a little bit of noise can help. Yeah. So yes, it is profound not only in the context of life, but in the context of entrepreneurship as well. When we seed an idea as entrepreneurs, when we look at a business plan on an Excel sheet, it all looks very rosy. But when we're treading on the untrodden path is about not knowing which pebble is going to trip you over. So it's not just naivety, it is a lot of courage where you don't know where this road is going, but you're willing to walk because you trust the process of life and you enjoy the journey. So that's what I'm picking from you. That's a very, very profound answer. Thank you. And did you just realize that you're very blessed to have a companion like Raji to be able to reflect on life and say this is how we dealt with it? Because I often believe that people are complete when they have great companions with them, and ideas are not born without great friendships and great companionships. You can't do anything alone in this world, and you need that. And I think that's very, very beautiful to see the two of you having journeyed together. But let's go back to those questions. Let's go back to those questions. How did you, Naveen, start dealing with those questions? So one thing is to ask questions, and we ask hajar questions to ourselves. Why is my street like this? Why is my government like this? Why are my schools like this? And then we don't do anything about it. We post on social media of late, so bhadas nikal lete hain. We get our angst out there and we forget about it. But how did you go to work on the questions that you asked? Did it require you to engage in further unlearning and learning the skills of education or running an educational enterprise or an educational platform, if I may call?
Typically what happened was when I visited a lot of schools around the country, specifically Tamil Nadu, I visited lots and lots of both rural schools and urban schools. I found that almost every school would have a few really amazing people. And the thing that I was always trying to think of was if I could put together that kind of a team, we would create actually magic, because most schools have 1 and 2 people like this. I honestly think at our school, I'm just surrounded by people like this that are just immensely capable, and I knew that all we needed to do was help them understand that they have a leader in them, they have creativity in them. And supporting them and enabling them. That's on the one hand with teachers. And with children, I think we get caught in the process of getting them ready for life and for undergraduate education. Somewhere there, I think we forget that they are children. We're expecting them to be somehow adult-like, and we applaud their adult-like behavior. When somebody is attired neatly, we applaud it. When a child is combed their hair well, we say that's neat. And we try to look for the adult in the child and celebrate that. I think a child must goof up, a child must not pay attention, a child must play a lot more. So I tried to see if we can celebrate a child for who he or she already is, rather than try to make them out to be something we want out of them. And I kept experimenting along those lines, trying to invite more people into my workplace, try to relook at what we were doing from a teaching standpoint, listen to children a lot more. They have so much to tell and they have so much energy. I think I was just drawing on that energy and saying, they're telling us so many things. All we need to do is listen. And I think broadly that's, I continue to do that, and I think if we are celebrated for a lot of things, it's because of our ability to recognize that children have a lot of strengths and we have a lot to learn from them. And we're not here to transform them into an adult that we have in our heads. We want them to be who they can be and who they want to be.
So did any of your research at that time lead you to a framework which existed globally that could be brought to India and adapted in terms of transformative educational practices? Did you try any of that?
So the first thing I did when I started working in school education is I enrolled myself in a teacher training diploma, Cambridge teacher training diploma, to try and understand what is facilitating learning in a school environment. And I got hooked on to a book in this course called the Revised Bloom's Taxonomy. And subsequently I went around asking a lot of people things in that book, people who had done B.Eds and who apparently knew a lot about it. More often than not, I found that everybody knew the theoretical aspect of it, but how they were practically applying it, I did not see at all. I still don't see it in most classrooms around the world. What happens is people talk only from a very knowledge-oriented learning program. They don't talk about skill development, cognitive skill development. So that's something I really hooked on.
So you learned that. You learned to.
I mean, it's as a framework, cognitive sciences existed for maybe 70 plus years, but I would say I'm still learning a lot about it. But I understand that there is more to knowledge transference than. There's more to education than just knowledge transference. And I sort of started doing a lot of experiments around it at school. The two of us. In the beginning, almost everybody said all this is, nobody understands it, it doesn't make sense. But we persisted because it was very, I don't know, to us it seemed so obvious that we're missing a whole element of learning and human development, and yet referring to school education as social good, We were talking, if you look at school education, it's mostly about the intellectual development. In the workplace, intellect plays a very small part.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. So if you look at his earlier answer, where he talked about understanding the space, going out there and understanding the space of school education as part of familiarizing himself with the overall environment, that was one answer. And the second part of the answer came now, where he talked about reskilling and retooling himself. And as from an entrepreneurial point of view, my takeaway is that understanding alone is not enough. You need to bring a great amount of skill. You need to know what you must do and how well you can do that. It's very, very critical. I remember some time back when my book Fall Like a Rose Petal was released, there was this grand vision that everyone's got a story, right? And we have a story, and it was there in the form of a book. And then everyone's got a dream, and we had this dream that we should have this story be told on screen. So it should become a movie. And that dream kind of fizzled out because the few people that we sent the book out to, nobody responded, and few filmmakers. So we said, why not we do it ourselves? So we went and enrolled to a screenwriting workshop with the master of screenwriting, filmmaking, Professor Hari. And one learning that came out of the retooling exercise was தெரியாத விஷயத்துலலாம் காலை விடக்கூடாது. You know, writing a book is very different from writing a screenplay, and we withdrew from it. So there you are. You know, I think that's a very, very important point. Don't get into it if you don't belong there, but if you belong there and you're getting a hang of it, go all the way there. You know, that's very important. And thank you for sharing that learning with us. It's very powerful. Let me ask you both now, when we are beginning to get onto an idea, and it's probably, in terms of your timelines, we're probably closing in on 2008, 2009, somewhere in that region. You came back in 2005. It's about three plus years of time being invested. When you're sitting on the edge of an idea, and you're about on the threshold of an idea, we often envision it, right? And we say this is how it should be. So when I read your website today, I pick up some very powerful lines there. I see that you call yourself a social incubation center, and I see that you say that your vision is to make children compassionate, lifelong learners. These are not, I don't think these are just words thrown in there because they're impressive. Did you both do an envisioning exercise for Head Start Learning Center? What was it like? And what did you envision yourselves as being in 2008, 2009, around that time?
Actually, the vision that we co-created at HLC is owned by every single facilitator. So the vision was actually developed through a very deliberate exercise where a professor from IIM Ahmedabad, he actually guided us through that activity. And what we realized was what Sudama, Maheshappa or Naveen or me, whatever we would have dreamt, it was 100 times compounded. It was a lot more. It was so much more powerful. Ours was a very small subset, but when the vision was co-created by the entire faculty that was there, about 30 or 40 of us, it was very, I think it was very humbling because they were dreaming of things that we had not even imagined about. So I think unless a vision is co-created by many people, it's going to be very, very narrow and shallow even. And even delivering it or even taking it to a larger populace is going to be very difficult. So we didn't know the power of co-creating a vision at that point. We just thought that it was the right thing to do. We thought that consensus matters, everyone should be engaged, everyone should be involved. It's a family. That's what we call ourselves right from day one. So in a family, everybody pitches in, everybody takes decision together. So we'll do the visioning activity together. But the outcome of that was something that we had not expected. And if we look back, we have actually done that. If we look back at all of those, elements of the vision that we put down, we have sort of, come a long way from there, literally met all of those dreams. They were our dreams and wishes. And it's very fulfilling to see that we have sort of, reached there collectively as a group.
That's fantastic. So you did have a formal visioning exercise. And I like the emphasis on the word co-creation. Again, not many people will have the wisdom to co-create. And even if they had it, they may not have the right partners or facilitators, as you call them, or the co-creators around them. The ecosystem will not be complete. In your case, both seem to have been there. And one of the things about visioning is not something that you go and you always need an IIM prof to come and do it for you at an individual level. You don't need it. Visioning is when you sit down and you ask yourself, what can be, what should be, and you write it down without looking at the limitations of what is. That is vision, and that's very, very powerful. And I've often done that with Vani. We've done that many times, and I totally agree with you, Raji, that when you write a vision and you see it unfold over a period of time, and then you sit back at a coffee shop maybe and reflect back on what happened, you will find that many of the items have been ticked off, are good to be ticked off because they've intuitively happened. So that's the power of vision. It kind of manifests itself into your reality, which is fascinating. But let's ask ourselves the next question. about the journey of HLC having moved from just a idea which had this grand vision to today it has 5 very powerful sub-ideas, if I can call them, that are seeded and are working very well. So would you like to introduce these 5 ideas, and then we'll talk about each one of them. So the 5 ideas are there, I think they passed the experimentation stage. So they were seeded as experiments in the space of expanding the definition of what education should do and can do. And each of them has a specific focus. I'll let one of them introduce it, and then we'll talk about each of them.
Yeah. So we were always looking at, a lot of my team members are here, they would always hear me say, don't teach 30 kids, teach 30 million kids. I think I think at some level all of us have absorbed that attitude that you can't bring every kid to this school. It's a 3 acres, ballpark, 130,000 kids can be fitted if there's a child per square foot. But if we actually thought about learning in a broader sense and take good ideas to more children in more schools, we can actually touch 30 million lives. And so that was the vision that brought us to thinking about every idea we sort of initiate at the school. And I can probably speak about
can you just list the 5 first for everyone to understand, and then we'll go one by one.
Okay. So in no particular order, Explorers is our idea of building integrity in sports through playing basketball. Kartavyam is a diploma in public problem solving to create more problem solvers in society. Cognify is to help make learning more relevant to the children in the classrooms. Militva is about collaborating with lots of people to create more common good. Which is the last one? Elena is really the first one, actually. I mean, it's the one that is seeded from the day mom started school. It's inclusion. How do we spread inclusion? How do we do more work for children of all kinds? There's nothing called disability in this world. I think we're all able and equally disabled in some sense. So can we create more spaces for children to be accepted everywhere? Those are the 5 initiatives.
Fantastic. So would you like to talk about each one of them briefly?
I can start with Explorers. Explorers, we started in 2013, started thinking about how can we build more integrity in sports. Most children are not taking to group sports primarily because of how politics comes into play. Most children take individual sports because politics cannot sort of thwart their dreams and aspirations. Invariably in group sports, you need to know somebody to be able to make it higher and higher. And so we started working both with children. We started organizing events where children organized the entire event, and we were stickler for rules. We would say everybody must show Aadhaar card and whatever identity proof to be able to qualify in a particular group. The referees were told that if you side with any team, even the home team, especially the home team, we will eject you literally. And we had participating schools as co-judges so that they would also monitor how the program is conducted and how fair it was played. We wanted fairness in sports. And so today we are able to, for the last 2 years, we've been selecting the under 13 and under 16 girls team for the district of Kanchipuram. And I'm proud to say both under 13 and under 16 national champions are Tamil Nadu for the last 2 years. And for the most part, I won't say 100%, for the most part, 90% of the children who participate qualify by age and skill. It's not through influence. And even the head of the Tamil Nadu Basketball Association has gone on record to say that we will not select anyone based on influence, and we'll select only on merit. I think that's a huge change for us.
Beautiful.
You want to say one?
I'll talk about Elena. Elena is our dream space for inclusion. I think whatever we do at HLC has been because of being inclusive. If you have to innovate, you have to be inclusive because it leads you to become innovative. In an inclusive classroom, your ideas cannot be limited to just the book and the curriculum. So I think being inclusive automatically leads itself to including more people in your journey, thinking about different ways of reaching children. And if HLC is innovative and if it is doing the path-breaking work that we are doing today, I think the reason for that is being inclusive. Elena is our vision. It's our theory of inclusion, where we are looking at creating an equitable society for any child in any which way, in a way they would like to be a part of the society. So in the last 23 years, we have done a lot of work and lot of experiments have happened. And in all of that, the essence of those 23 years of work and experiments and doing things right and getting things wrong was when every single stakeholder for a child, when every single person who is working with the child, be it the parent, the service provider, or the school, the teachers, their peers, when every single person talks the same language, understands the needs of the child, communicates with each other with a sense of trust and transparency, progress of the child is smoother rather than a very jagged edge curve. So that's the concept that we have taken the essence, and Elena has grown out of that essence. So now we are ready to take that idea to the whole new world. We have mentors in Elena, some of them here as a part of our audience, thought leaders also here as a part of our audience. So we have started taking these small experiments and now we are validating that idea. Initially, it has been validated within HLC and we know for sure it works. We are in a journey of how do we validate that this concept is something that can be taken out, and then we are looking at how can we affect policy, how are we able to affect the way people think about inclusion. So Elena is in that journey of changing the conversation on inclusion.
Just one clarification. She said 23 years, so she's counting from the time Sudha set up the school.
Yes.
It's 23 years since Sudha set up the school, and it's 13 years since Raji and Naveen have been involved with it. So, Elena, just one question, quick question on Elena. So, when you talk inclusive environment being created, I think it's also about all of us developing empathy, right?
Absolutely.
For the child with who has a special need, or in terms of creating an ecosystem that is pluralistic, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think, like I said, inclusion lends itself to people being more caring, being more aware, looking from the child's perspective. You forget the lesson, you forget the book, you forget the curriculum, and you start looking at the child. So if you want to achieve child-centric education and learning, inclusion leads itself to, help you thinking about it.
That's a huge shift. That's a huge shift. I have a question coming up, but I'll keep it for the very end. Yes.
So Kartavyam is another initiative. Basically, we were, given that we believe that education, school education is a very limiting idea itself. I think we must grow out of this idea that school education must somehow prepare children for college and adulthood. And we say that on the one hand, but in action we only do, curriculum and various other things. We felt that children are actually not prepared to be a part of society at all. There's no teaching of how to engage in society. We are compounded with problems in society. Every day the number of problems around us is growing, yet we do no work at all in building problem solvers. We don't have any program to help people deal with problems. And one of our colleagues in another organization, he once said, most solutions introduce new problems. And so we felt that children are not actually taught anything about problem solving. They were learning a lot about science and math and English, but they don't know how to solve a problem right outside their home. So we started looking at how can we build capacity in a very methodical manner, in a manner that what we introduce does not turn out to be another problem. So we started looking at designing. We used something called a human-centered design on how can we identify the problem, understand it, model solutions. Children can't be going out and solving the problems themselves, but they can model solutions. And how can they story tell it so that more people, more children in society can adopt such ideas. And it was, in my opinion, it's a roaring success. I think there's not been a school that I've talked to that has said, I don't want it. In fact, they've said, please help us adopt this diploma in our school. We have time for it. We want to do it. Some of our co-creators have taken it. We've gone to colleges which have said, we want to do it. Now, as recently as last week, I was at Shastra University. They're saying, let's do this diploma too. To me, that's huge success, because that means we're going to have more problem solvers. And I know problem solvers exist in this room. Some of them have championed great work. And this would be our way of enabling their work and any other work in society that solves social problems.
Beautiful, beautiful. You know, I think this point will be appreciated better if we clarify here, for the sake of the audience, especially those who don't know HLC, is that they are not restricting their initiatives to just one school, which is their own. They are seeding these ideas in their school, they are experimenting it with them there, and then they're taking it forward to whoever is willing to welcome them. So it could be another school, it could be another environment completely, it could be somebody in society or a community that takes it forward and embeds it in their circle of influence. So they go beyond the scope of HLC itself, and that's something remarkable about all their 5 initiatives. So who's going to talk about the next one?
I'll talk about Cognify. Cognify started from
Cognify is spelled with a K.
Cognify spelt with a K, and it started from the Bloom's taxonomy days. Our experiments on, one is, are we preparing children for life, or are we preparing children for an exam? But then the other way to answer it is, if you want to prepare them for an exam, can you do it right? Can you at least, have some thought process in preparing them for that exam, which is not just rote-based, but also involves science of learning. So through a lot of pilot strategy experiments in school, we sat in classrooms, we documented every single child's interaction with the teacher. We tried to see what is working, where is the gap, and where are children lagging behind. We actually asked ourselves a very critiquing, difficult question, that we say that we are very good, we are doing path-breaking work, then why are there some children who are not benefiting even though they have been a part of our system? I think before even anyone asks, we ask ourselves those questions quite often, which is why I think we keep doing more. But we felt that when we are doing so much, the teacher is so caring, so affectionate, she goes into the class and puts all her passion into the lesson, but then learning is not happening. So we tried to look at parameters, we tried to look at data-driven scientific approach, we looked at the science of learning, and Cognify is a result of all of those experiments that we conducted, we thought of in our challenges of getting children to learn in a way that learning can happen, they can be prepared for exams. Right now, Cognify, we have taken to almost 2,000 students. We did a research pilot last year with about 15 to 20 schools, where we were able to see clear improvement in results. A research paper has been written by another organization that was published, and we didn't even realize the impact. Actually, that research paper told us, it was a validation for us that, yeah, we are doing something good. We came to know about it much later. But our journey in Cognify is also to use artificial intelligence, use machine learning, use the new age technologies to solve real life problems in the classroom, so that it's not just tech driven, but it's actually education driven. It's the theory of science driven, theory of learning driven. Right now it is at a stage where we have tried to simplify it so much so that we can get a lot of data, where we are seeing the teacher has taught something today, child has gone home, he's doing karate and kung fu and football and basketball and other subjects as well. When he comes back the next day, he's almost forgotten most of the things, most of the learners, not all, but most of the learners have forgotten what has happened. So how do we help children keep pace with the teacher in a very simple, easy, relevant manner, where the content that they are going to be working on is very closely related with what the teacher has been teaching them in the classroom. So it's a very simplistic idea, but I think it's very powerful in the way it's going to give us insights. And we are right now in a stage where we are collecting data, and hopefully the insights that we get from that data will help us make a lot of headway in the coming years. So the thought leaders for Cognify and for Kartavyam as well are all in this group, so acknowledging them as well.
Thank you, thank you. The last one.
Well, it's the last one that is scaling well, but we're doing a lot of other stuff as well. Militwa is basically an idea of how can we collaborate with others in society and create more common good. Initially, we started with just sort of a 1 month long entrepreneurial work with year 6, I think, year 6 students, where we'd give them, from the school, we'll give every child certain amount of money, and we'll give them a framework of how they can use that money to grow, to build things themselves, make whatever they want, but sell them in the real world and earn a profit out of it. And that profit goes to, supporting various charitable trusts. We picked one particular charitable trust, and for the last 2 years, we have, initially it was 40,000 children were given 15,000 totally. All children were given 500 rupees, and they grew it to 40,000. This year, last year, they grew it to 1.5 lakhs almost. And yeah. So this year we are looking to see how can we put that framework together, because every school will be happy to do this, because all children must enable more children that don't go to schools that deserve an education just like them, but because of circumstances don't get to go get the same kind of opportunities. So we're trying to see if this can become a model that can go out and serve lots and lots of schools, can adopt something like this and offer such a program for their children, and they can find out which organizations they want to support. I think in society, if we want a better society, we have to do one of two things: either actively engage with the problem and solve it, or enable those who are actively engaged with it. I think this is a way to enable other people who are actively engaged in social problems. That's one, and we're also looking at setting up spaces for social do-gooders, if you will, to be able to celebrate them, to be able to enable them. I look at our trust as an organization that must initiate and enable anyone who's doing good work in society, especially in the area of children and young adults. And so Militwa is doing more work in that space continuously.
Just to add on to that, it is not just for children to, do this common good, but as a school as well, we have adopted another school where our thought leaders are going there, understanding their practices, trying to see what will work and how to bring incremental change, which can actually have a compounded effect. So it's not about completely going and saying that what you're doing is wrong or bad. They are working with a school that works with underprivileged children, and they are trying to see how, with very small changes, by using that same school's ethos and philosophy, how can we actually bring about more change. So we are enabling them through thought leadership, as well as providing materials and other ideas that we carry. So they actually study different schools. They study HLC, they study other schools that are working with underprivileged children, and they try to understand how education for underprivileged children is in this space, and then they try to take that learning in this school that we have adopted.
Listening to both of them talk about these 5 ideas, I wish I was at least 40 years younger, and I wish I had been part of your school. Then I wouldn't have been thrown out. I was thrown out famously from school because I flunked in geometry. I flunked in geography as well, but they threw me out for geometry. So my memories of school are only outside the classroom, and therefore I completely relate to what you're sharing about whether it is problem solving or whether it is developing an attitude of fair play and integrity, whether it is about understanding this whole attitude of doing good, whether it is about measuring learning in a constructive manner rather than just giving grades to people and treating them like sheep. I think whatever it is, the attempt that you're making is very, very powerful. So I want to ask you a question here. I'm going to be out of time pretty soon. So after that, we need to go to the audience for their questions. But I have a question which has two parts, actually. So part A first. Part A is about, we live in a world where, particularly in India, the Indian education system is controlled by draconian rules and administrators who have very little gray matter, in my opinion. Okay, so how do you manage to work on such innovative ideas while living and working within the framework of our academic system?
Like I said, the academic system actually requires very little. It's only focusing on one thing, intellectual development. Be it a matriculation school or an international IB school or an IGCSE school, if you intend to do good things, you can do them regardless of the syllabus. Syllabus is not going to stop you from doing anything. So I think there is a lot of space for schools to innovate. There's lots of things they can do. We tend to overemphasize one and therefore tend to think that there's no time left for doing anything else. I beg to differ. I find that children actually are better engaged when you have them participate in many of the things that we do at our learning center. And I find that they are not just intellectually developed, but they're also social do-gooders. I look up to each of our children and think there's a champion here. And I think that's possible regardless of the framework that government throws at you. And yes, government throws a lot of things at you at schools. Most people don't, it's a very complex problem. We won't get into that now.
So the framework is not limiting, though it does seem restrictive. But for the willing mind, the framework is not limiting. That's what I'm picking up. And my part B of the question is, and I'm sure many people in the audience will have this question as well, so I'll ask it on behalf of everyone. Education in India is considered a very lucrative space for making profits. There's a lot of money in education. And therefore, if you see, with due respect to any educators sitting in the audience or educationalists, should I call them, or education entrepreneurs listening to this conversation, I think many people like to keep it within themselves. They'd like to grow the business, quote unquote, and keep the spoils for themselves. But you seem to be taking a very collaborative approach and a very inclusive approach, saying, here's an idea, and you want to take it and run with it. We give you the framework, we give you our learnings, please run with it. So there's a lot of giving attitude there. How have you stayed clear from the lure of pure play profitability?
Actually, that was the easy part. My parents, when they set up the school, they set it up as a public trust. So if you didn't run it for money, what would you do? Was how they set up the school. So, and we have no intention of changing that. I think the goal has to be to do good for society ahead of all other things. And as an organization, I've been told hundreds of times by lots of people that you cannot run one section only schools, you can't run various forms of why I cannot do what we continue to do quite well. But I think we've had that staying power, and we've sort of persisted with the belief that you can be a small school. You don't have to grow the school itself. To do good for society, actually, the ideas that emanate from this place must grow and influence different societies and different institutions. But the institution itself must be small. Only then we can be very research oriented. We can truly understand problems of society when we have the time and space. Education, the two elements that education needs most but are unavailable in schools are time and space. For good learning to happen, you have to have time and you have to have space. Typically, we tell this must be learnt in this period. I think learning does not work like that. So by staying small, we have actually shown that you can build capacity in children, in society, in our teaching fraternity by giving space and time and celebrating who they already are rather than having outcomes set for them.
Fantastic. You know, this is an answer that after I give my two bit of learning here deserves a round of applause after I do that. Okay, you can clap again after I'm done. Okay, the point is.
I just wanted to add one more point as
Yeah,
well.
quickly.
Contentment. Because that is what finally derives all of this, right? Are you going to be happy with monetary benefit, or are you going to be happy with enabling people? I think for both of us, enabling people is very, it gives us a sense of high and sense of feeling of happiness. So I think that is what.
Fantastic. So two big words there. One is contentment. The other one was a phrase. What would you do if it was not only about making money? What else would you do with it? And that is what purpose is really all about. Purpose is not about earning a living. Purpose is not about making money alone. Money is a byproduct. But the purpose of our creation, the reason why we've been endowed this human form, the reason why there was a call to come back from the US, and through which the calling was found. So there was a call and then there was a calling. Why this happened, the purpose behind that is far more powerful than the profits that may ensue. And the real profit is in understanding this beautiful word, contentment. The real profit is in looking back and saying, there go kids who have been touched by our environment and who have blossomed into compassionate, lifelong learners. That's the way I would like to talk about HLC. Thank you so much. So we can have a very tight Q&A. For many of you who have not been able to see us, we can take the questions offline. But those who are going to ask questions, please keep it as questions, not as comments, not as observations. I need to time it, and we need to finish on time. So the first question, please. Yes, sir.
You have been giving the students how to live in this world. That is their main idea of giving education to the students. But this present world, if you want to settle in your life after your education, you are going up to the level of high schooling. But there is one more step, that is college level. If you want to enter into the good college, if you want to enter into the IIM, or if you want to get a MBBS degree, you need 99.9%. But your education is not the examination oriented. How your students will cope up with that demand, how they will settle in their life. That is my question.
Very nice question. Two answers there. One he will give, one I will give. Okay. No, you.
It's a loaded question. I think, honestly, there have been children graduating from our school, and they're doing fantastic work. I don't think I need to qualify whether their marks is what people looked at. Today's best universities don't care enough just about marks. It's about what else did you do. If you go to a specific major in a particular college, they want to know what else do you bring besides this subject, because we have this specialization already ourselves. So they want to see a well-rounded human being come and influence their work significantly, and you can't do it just with marks. And so marks, while there are universities and colleges that are expecting, like you said, a particular mark, I think our children are finding ways to be celebrated and pursue their interests regardless of that space.
Yeah, quickly.
It's not an either or question. It's not that if you're going to be a good individual, you won't be able to score marks. It can be a both question. So there is a lot of work that is done, not just in developing the whole child, but there is a lot of thought process in helping children learn and trying to understand about themselves. So even if they may not get a 99, they may still get by to whatever course that they want to do. So the choices that they make are also dependent on that. So it's not, generally we look at life as an either or. We always think that you have to do this or that. There are many times that we can actually blend those choices available if we are more informed about what opportunities lie in front of us also.
Fantastic. I want to answer that question as well. Very quickly, I flunked all the way through my academic education, third class in school, third class in physics, second class in journalism. I blew up all the money that I made and became bankrupt. So if you ask me, am I settled in life? I don't know. Okay? But am I happy? Very. Very, very, very happy because I've learned the value of being non-worrying, non-frustrated and non-suffering. And I've taught my two children this thing. So if you ask me, am I a successful parent? Yes. In my own rating. I don't know what my children have to say. But this is the idea of settlement. So it's a very relative point. Okay? Yes. Only one question. The gentleman at the back, please. Yes.
Hi, Naveen. I can vote for both Naveen and Raji being lifelong learners because I had the opportunity to be with them in Finland for 7 days. Okay, the question here is, if you have to recreate HLC, what are the couple of things you would not want to do?
Well, I won't try to recreate this. There's a simple reason for that because I didn't create it all myself, right? It's there's too many players who have put their life's effort in building what we have. So I don't think even people have asked me, I'll give you land opposite your school, put multiple sections, and this cannot be done again by me. Or Raji, I think, and we don't even intend to because when we built the school, the architect asked, how many children do you foresee coming here? And I didn't understand space, and I said 1,000 children. And then when I built the first half, I said, this is it. I think 400 is too many. Now we're trying to grow from 400 to 350, not 450. We want to grow down. I think we do phenomenally better work at 350 than we can do at 400. So there's no second HLC as far as I can see.
Okay, I will take the last question from the gentleman. Yes, sir.
Like Montessori method you are using in teachings, refugee curriculum, anything, something like Montessori system?
We actually combined various methodologies. So our KG curriculum is a combination. It takes the best practices out of Montessori method and then activity-based approach. And it is again co-created by all the KG teachers and the facilitators and all of them. Depending on the needs of the child. What we did 10 years ago, we don't do it now. It's very relevant to the needs of the new age children that we are seeing today. And we see that shift. So it captures the best practices of various curricula. Yeah.
So, interesting questions there, and I think the moment you look at school, you look at it as something within the framework of a piece of real estate where people go and are graded based on their performance in exams. But I think the biggest school is life itself, and being prepared. None of the schools that you have gone to or I have gone to has prepared us for the big F word in life. Do you know what the big F word in life is? Not a 4-letter word. It's failure. You're not prepared for failure when you enter the big world. You're not prepared for a health setback when you enter the big world. You're not prepared for a bankruptcy. You're not prepared for a relationship problem. You're not prepared to innovate, to experiment, to take the deep dive into the world of uncertainty. You're not prepared for all of that. And I think that's what HLC is trying to do by encouraging children to be free. And so does it fall into any framework? As long as it helps them to be better citizens and better leaders, I think Raji and Naveen are leading a wave of transformation. And we should give them a round of celebration on that note. Thank you. I'm going to do my customary 1-minute wrap. I would like to wrap it up today with something that Walter Gropius, a very famous architect, the father of the modernist era of architecture, one of the founding fathers of that era, Walter Gropius said that any work that is a product of your inner awakening, any work that is a product of your inner awakening is what is truly spiritual and gives meaning to life. And he also said that when you believe that your contribution is vital, somebody will always be there to pick up from where you left off, and that's your claim to immortality. So their contribution has been vital already, because they're not just seeing it as the two of them, they're seeing it as an ecosystem of co-creators, thought leaders, and people that are working alongside them. And so their contribution has been vital. So somebody will pick it up, somebody will ride this wave, somebody will take it forward. And because this has come from an inner call, from an inner awakening, there is a lot of meaning to it. And anything that is meaningful is never forgotten. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for staying back and listening to this conversation. It's been a beautiful conversation with you, Raji and Naveen. Let me invite Group Captain Vijay to come forward and give his closing remarks. And Venkat is going to do the closing remarks? Okay, so Vijay, please, since you're here, you also join us here. And all of you can take free hugs from me because all of you sat through this. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You all agree with me, you have a fantastic, fabulous session of
Yeah, am I audible now? I think a little more audible than required actually. So, we had a fabulous session this evening. You all agree with me. The full house tells us the story, because normally people, we find people to be waiting for hugs. Today, I think you will have to wait till everybody finishes their hugs now. You're going to be late today. It's been a fabulous session, as I said, and a lot of things that they said. I'm sure many of us in this hall, at least the ones who have a grey hair like me, would realize that, why didn't we have a HLC when we went to school? Do you agree with me, most of you? Yeah, a lot of those nodding heads tell me this story today. So, fabulous story, sir. It's really uncommon for someone to live that life in New Jersey with the dream of starting a coffee shop here and then doing this bit of, there's one coffee shop at one place and then they end up doing this on the name of trust. Really uncommon for someone to start a school successful as this and to say that I'll not make money, but I'll, live the purpose with which I've started the school. Really uncommon to say that a school which is clocking 400 will grow to 350. So a lot of uncommon things that we have heard today. And Avis, as usual, fantastic curator. We have been, so first round of applause to Avis. He always gets the best out of the people. It's difficult to call some of the best people to the platform, but also more difficult to get the best out of the best. So Avis always done a wonderful job in that. Thanks, Avis. And for both of you, uncommon leader, actually, you're uncommon leaders, two of you sitting us there. So thanks for coming and sharing your story with us. It's a lot of learning today. One thing is that, Avis was saying that when he remembers his school period, most of the memories are outside his classroom. Actually, my memories are most outside the school. For him, I think geometry did him in. For me, it was algebra. There was a slight difference. But most of us share the same. So anyway, thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen, for staying back. May I request Group Captain Vijay Kumar, the Executive Director of MMA, to present the memento.